Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? This week's news items are relatively limited, but they're all the more poignant for that limitation. An example being the rejection of a malpractice claim because vaccines supposedly caused a child's autism. A heart transplant for an infant. And a man who had a stroke leading to a case study of his tongue turning black and growing hair. These news items and others for this week can be found in the description box below. Let's start with the legal claim that vaccines caused a child's autism, which was rejected in Tennessee, America. Yes, somehow, a Tennessee jury has found that vaccines do not cause autism. Of course, anyone who's rational shouldn't find that all that surprising, but the very fact that this got as far as it did and has been at least entertained by the courts is somewhat amazing. Admittedly, the case did not exactly fail because it didn't have any basis, but rather, there was no basis for a medical malpractice claim. The claimant was arguing that by giving the child a vaccine, the doctors had caused the autism, that they had violated the standard of care, committed malpractice, and as a result, they should be compensated. The jury found none of these were the case. Any child that has severe autism, and especially low-functioning autism, can be quite a shock to the parents, and they may be angry or desperate to find some sort of answer. This explains why they may chase down someone like, say, a doctor who they believe has done something wrong. The problem with this case is that the vaccine assertion against the doctor wasn't their first attempt. Rather, they'd already been to the Omnibus Autism Proceedings Court, or of a sort anyway, where the special master had found in a very thorough decision that their claim had been rejected. They appealed this to both the Circuit Court of Claims and then to the Federal Circuit. Both of them rejected the appeal. This means well before they came anywhere near suing the doctor, they'd already been told by several courts reinforcing an original decision that this was not going to go anywhere. Even when the parents were trying to argue that they weren't given enough information about vaccines to make an informed decision, and therefore informed consent was not provided, did not sway the jury. If the family tries to pursue this, they likely only have one possible option left, the Supreme Court of the United States. The chances that SCOTUS will give them that hearing and will overturn vaccines are relatively low, given that they are very selective in how many cases they hear, which cases they hear, and if they will even hear a case that they might otherwise have because the facts aren't suitable for them to be able to use in their decision-making process. This means that there's very little hope that after 20-odd years of litigation, the family will be able to get what they believe to be vindication, but is likely just their own perpetual assertion that something else, other than bad fate, led to their son developing autism. This case, at least the legalities of it, contrast quite starkly to another matter coming out of Canada, and that is the continued censoring of a naturopath who's been giving vitamin IVs to mental health patients without the doctor's knowledge. That is a big problem. A naturopath is not a doctor in any way, shape or form. We've spoken to some degree in the past about the basis of their quackery, and it is largely just that, quackery. The fact that they're providing anything intravenously, and worse yet, providing it as a medicinal treatment, is a very big problem. You need to be registered and have the appropriate qualifications to provide treatments in certain categories. For example, many nutrient supplements, if they're going to be given in this sort of way, would require medical training, or at least to be a dietitian, and then have the appropriate facilities provide the treatment. A naturopath does not fall under any of these categories so far. Already, you should be asking what a naturopath has done if they already know they shouldn't be doing this, and it comes down to what happened when they did provide intravenous vitamins to one patient. A mother has sent in a complaint about the naturopath after her son died from a pulmonary embolism caused by a blood clot, the belief being that it may have been related to his treatment by the naturopath. The first complaint was fundamentally dismissed. The board claimed that everything had been done according to their guidelines and standards, which is a worry, as their standards are about as strong as wet tissue paper. This is when the mother went to the Health Professions Review Board, and what they found was that the inspection and investigation of this was nowhere near up to standard. Their conclusions were that it was unreasonable and the investigation inadequate. Perhaps if they had done that, they would have found out that the psychiatrist that the man had been seeing had contacted the naturopath and asked them to stop providing that therapy, presumably on medical bases, which would be a very important contraindication. More so when you realize that at least some of these therapies were provided when the patient was hospitalized involuntarily. They were there under a court order to get the necessary help they needed, and yet a naturopath was preying on them to give them a therapy that would do very little and could possibly have caused harm unnecessarily. We go from the pseudoscientific naturopathy to actual medicine that may work. It's the first-of-a-kind heart transplant for an infant. The big problem with heart transplants are, as we've noted in past weeks, that the host may reject it on the basis of it recognizing the organ as being foreign to the host body. Because of this, there's a lot of issues around trying to suppress the immune system of the host and hope that it doesn't attack the organ. This means they can live a relatively normal life, albeit with a diminished immune system. The trick with this particular medical development is that, amongst other things, it's for children or infants, but that when an organ is transplanted from one person to another, they also take thymus tissue. The thymus is where some of your immune cells not only mature, but are selected for to ensure that they don't attack your own body. This would, at least in theory, mean that if the thymus does its job and prevents the body from targeting itself, you would have far fewer issues with the use of immunosuppressants, if any are needed at all. Because children have a relatively underdeveloped immune system, this should work well with them. The challenge will be scaling it and developing it in such a way that it can be used with those with a developed or mature immune system, notably adults. Going from health-related news that is a movement and development in the world to a weird case study. It's the case of a 50-year-old male who presented to doctors in India with a black hairy tongue after experiencing a stroke. The stroke had occurred 3 months beforehand, and in order to allow him to be able to continue feeding himself and managing most of his own needs, he was put on a liquid diet, or as close as could be managed. This led to the development of a thick black coating over his tongue, which obviously wasn't ideal. After all, any strange and unusual growths inside the human body should be seen as bad. It turns out that this is not a weird or unusual diagnosis or even case study. It's simply the bizarre way in which the circumstances all came together. It's a condition called lingua villosa nigra, and it's where, due to a lack of solid and abrasive substances moving across the tongue develops the hairy buildup, and the skin as well. Normally, if you eat something solid and at least somewhat abrasive, it would carry that extra material away and you wouldn't ever know you had it. The pureed diet, by virtue of being practically a liquid diet, removed this particular resolution to the problem. Going from very modern to very old news now, and the discovery of 14th century sarcophagi under the Notre Dame Cathedral. Specifically, the lead-made sarcophagi held bodies that could be of remarkable scientific quality. Admittedly, the reason we've discovered these isn't exactly ideal. It was a result of the 2019 fire which largely damaged parts of the Notre Dame Cathedral and destroyed the spire. Along with the sarcophagi were painted sculptures and various other architectural elements that have long since been lost. Our final piece of news brings us back to the modern, and in this case, its further impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on scientific developments and research. The European Space Agency has voted to suspend a joint mission with Russia that would see them putting a rover on Mars to explore it. As of the 17th of March, the announcement now holds that they'll not be working with Russia. Russia's involvement in the development of this rover included some rather important analytical equipment and thrusters. Without these, they're going to have to start looking to others for that equipment, whether that's NASA or private industry. The unfortunate delay here will likely mean that the rover itself does not see its deployment sometime in September of this year as had been hoped. This means that we're not going to be finding out whether or not there's organic matter buried deep under the Martian surface anytime soon. That's all the news we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.